You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney Flynn. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Mama podcast. This is your host, Christine Mooney Flynn, and it is so good to have you with me today as I am going to just talk into the mic for a little bit. Gentlemen, if I have gentlemen listening to the Catholic Mama podcast, this podcast episode today is mostly going to be for the ladies. So women, if you're listening, welcome. Men, you're welcome to stay as well. But as I'll be talking about why breastfeeding can be so difficult and what I wished I had known when I first started to nurse my child, and what I've learned over the past almost 6 continuous years of nursing a baby, you can stay. Please feel free. There's actually 2 topics. That's probably the most female-centric topic that I want to touch on today. I've just been getting a lot of questions and feedback and ideas coming in through Instagram and emails that I wanted to address a few of them in kind of a hodgepodge episode. So bear with me as we cover a few different topics in kind of a quick fire format. So I want to talk about breastfeeding. And if something is so natural, why is it so dang hard? I also want to talk about a question that I really got a lot about recently was, why should I veil? If somebody asked, do I veil in the Mass? I do. Actually, I veil anytime I'm in the church, whether that's for confession or if I'm going through the sanctuary. If I'm volunteering to clean the sanctuary, I wear my veil. I will explain more about that and maybe give you an idea if you would like to try wearing the veil. I know it feels like a flashing neon sign the first time you wear one. Or should not even just the first time, like the first couple, maybe even month that you wear one. I also want to talk about a Catholic perspective on disciplining your children, which not very many people talk about discipline. And we always hear about the Catholic Church, that nuns would we're big on corporal punishment, right? And rapping people on the knuckles with rulers or so on. But I want to talk about, as parents, how should we be disciplining our children? And what is the difference between discipline and punishment? And then finally, I want to touch on, I think, some well-meaning posts that I've seen on social media about how, ladies find a man who ... But I think that actually has a lot of negative undertones to it. And I want to touch on that too. So welcome again to a rather hodgepodge female-centric episode. And again, men, if you're listening, feel free to stay. But women, this one's really, really for you. So where do we begin? I think with veiling. I would like to start with veiling. I started veiling, wearing a veil to Mass, probably within, I don't know, I want to say within less than half a year of becoming Catholic. I had seen, you always see photos of women wearing the veils, and I knew that from my mother, who had grown up Catholic, that she always had to wear a head covering in church, and that tradition and or requirement had gone away over time. And even I believe when I went and visited the Vatican, I think when I was, this is 2004, so a long time ago, I'm pretty sure I had to put on a head covering when I went in. I don't quite remember, but I remember no shorts, I think, and I had to wear a head covering. I could be wrong on that because it was a long time ago and I was not religious, but I'm pretty sure of that. So I knew about wearing a veil. It looked very feminine and beautiful, but also was it old-fashioned, and I never saw anybody else wearing it. But in my continued research into the Catholic faith, I decided that, if I'm going to be Catholic, I wanted to go all in. And I think that shows up a lot, and you probably can tell if you follow me on Instagram or you listen to this podcast, that everything from daily Mass to liturgical living to living the Catholic life with my husband and our children, natural family planning, everything. I mean, I figured after all these years of living without God, if I was going to live with God, I wanted to go all in. And if the Catholic Church for the first a couple thousand years wanted women to wear a head covering in the Mass, then I would too. Now, at first, I'll be honest, I had no good reasons of why I did that beyond that. I didn't know if there was any other reason besides tradition, which is a very good reason anyway, because again, our whole religion is based on scripture and tradition. So if it was just tradition, then that was a good enough reason for me. And so I started wearing the veil, which I just bought a couple of kind of cheapy ones off of Amazon. And I probably actually should get an upgrade because that sounds kind of nice. I've been eyeing some very pretty navy blue veils that maybe I'll treat myself to. But in the meantime, I just got a white veil and a black veil. And to be honest, I mostly just wear the white or the black veil, As a married woman, it seems more appropriate for me that I have married and had children, that it is this kind of death to self, that I wear the black veil. Now, I've let my daughters, who occasionally will say that they want to wear a veil, I'm not pressuring them to at all, but I'll let them borrow my white one if one of them feels like wearing a veil. At some point I'm going to get, or maybe I did. You know what? It's before quarantine. I keep forgetting this. I did get some child-size veils for my daughters after they had requested to wear my white one and borrow that, and it's so big on them. But I haven't really required them to wear a veil. I figured that once they get to the point where they're having their first Holy Communion, then I would encourage them to start wearing a veil every time we go into church. So I just wear this black veil. And like I said, if I volunteer to clean the inside of the church, I wear the veil. If I go to Mass, every time I go to Mass, I wear the veil. If I'm going to confession, I wear the veil. And it wasn't until a while into wearing it that I really started to research why. And at first I leaned heavily on what St. Paul had written in the first letter to the Corinthians. I think it's chapter 11, verses 5-6 mostly, I think, are the ones that cover this. And it's basically saying that a woman needs to wear a veil, otherwise she brings shame upon herself. But I leaned on that for a little while as kind of the reason that I wore the veil. But as I got to know Paul, the Pauline letters a little bit more and understand that he was writing in the context of the culture at the time, I figured that wasn't a good enough reason to use. I wanted a better or a more in-depth and contemporary reason of why I was upholding this long-held tradition. And then I came across a couple of reasons that I thought were really compelling. And now, despite the feelings of uncertainty and nervousness, and I didn't want to bring attention to myself when I first started wearing the veil, I'm all in now. And I got to tell you, it feels so weird to walk into a church and not have one. I've forgotten, a couple of times here and there. I usually keep it in my glove compartment, but then we had to get a rental car once, totally forgotten, went to church and walked, and I started patting my head. I was like, oh, where is it? And I just have an infinity scarf one that actually stays on pretty well, considering that I have small children crawling all over me during Mass and pulling it down. So anyway, the reasons, the main reason that I really, it seems to speak to the uniqueness and the beauty of womanhood is, as a woman, we are a sacred vessel of God's, right? We, unlike a man, we can contain life. And that is a beautiful, sacred thing. We work with God. We cooperate with God and His grace to hold and contain life. I mean, wow, that's incredible. You really stop to think about that. It's not this burden. It is a really, really beautiful thing, even though it's very difficult a lot of times and there's suffering involved while you're pregnant. But man, we can, by our very nature, unlike anything men can do, we can hold life. We are sacred vessels. Okay, now you go into the Mass. There are other sacred vessels there. The tabernacle is a sacred vessel for the body of Christ. The chalice is a sacred vessel for the blood of Christ. And what is happening during the Mass? Those, or even just in the sanctuary, right? The tabernacle is covered, right? It encases the body of Christ. The chalice, once the wine has been turned into the blood of Christ, it is covered. Well, those are sacred vessels, and they're covered during the Mass and in the sanctuary. I'm a sacred vessel. Shouldn't I also in a very special way, I'm a sacred vessel. So I should also cover myself and show reverence to the divine occupation, job, I guess you could say, that God has given me. So that really is the reason that resonated most with me. Also, another thing that I really like is that, the church is the bride, Jesus is the bridegroom. Brides wear veils, right? And a woman is a woman is a symbol for, lives out kind of the church, right? And her being, the church is female, a woman is a female, right? So as the bride, you veil yourself, right? So you veil yourself in deference and humility to Jesus. So if you're going into God's house, shouldn't I show humility? Well, and I can do that through covering my head. It also is so feminine. It's absolutely so beautiful and feminine. Even if you see, a senior citizen wearing a veil, it's beautiful. It's an absolute treasure to see this. And I guess, if you go to a Latin mass, you'll see more women wearing a veil than not typically. And it's just a beautiful feminine expression of humility and faith. It is a sermon lived out. And of course, we don't want to draw attention to us for the sake of drawing attention to ourselves. But if we draw attention to ourselves because we are showing respect to God, well, that's a really good reason to have attention, be honest, right? If we are showing our humility, that's not a bad thing to get attention for. I know it sounds like a little paradoxical, but it as long as you're not doing it because you want people to look at you and think you're beautiful, and there's narcissism there. But if you're doing it as kind of a silent evangelization tool, wonderful, because we truly need more reverence in the Mass. People chit chat during the Mass. I've seen so many young people on their phones in the Mass. Whole conversations about golf games, or people rolling their eyes about something the priest says. All this stuff. There's Eucharistic abuses. There's so much going on in the Mass. We truly need to try a little bit more. And if you think about the Mass is the wedding feast, well, you would get dressed up for a wedding, right? So you wear nice clothes and you show your humility to the bridegroom, which is Christ himself. So if you needed a reason to wear a veil or wanted to try it out, I hope that helps in you deciding whether or not you're going to do it. If you're really nervous about it, you could always just go to a different church that you won't know anybody there, and they don't see you, and they won't be thinking that you're like, oh gosh, what is she doing now? And you could try wearing the veil there and see how you feel, just to get your feet wet and get used to it. That's fine. It's certainly the same idea if you go to confession at a different church, just because you feel embarrassed about confessing something to a priest that well, do what you need to do. I think as you go along, you'll be surprised how natural and right it feels to wear a veil. So again, I just bought mine off Amazon for $15 each or something. There are beautiful veils that don't cost that much more, like $30 or $40 or something like that. And especially if you're thinking you're going to wear it at least every Sunday, and perhaps, anytime you go to daily Mass or go into confession, or you stop in to do prayers at adoration, you're getting your money's worth for sure. But there are beautiful veils. If you even just go to Etsy and search for Catholic veils, there's some gorgeous, gorgeous ones. I like the infinity scarf one just because I love that feel, and I like having my neck kind of covered sometimes. So I find that one to be the most comfortable. And if it falls off, it's already attached to my neck. I'm not going to lose it. So I really like it. And again, it feels right, and it feels reverent, and I feel very awkward not wearing it now, which also means I tend now to wear dresses more frequently. I used to wear pants sometimes when going to Mass, but it kind of feels awkward to be more traditional with the veiling and then wear contemporary clothing. So I tend to, it seems to go hand in hand, where wearing a veil has brought on more a more feminine dress too. Not that there's anything wrong with pants. I'm not I'm not saying that. I don't want to get into that that debate. But it's just for what it's worth. I found myself dressing up more nicely because, again, it's the wedding feast. since I've been, and more femininely because of the veil, which is just all interesting and beautiful. As a sacred vessel, from one sacred vessel to another, I highly recommend you pray about or think about trying out the veil if you're not already. And if you are wearing a veil, I hope that gives, if somebody asks you why, it's always good, because I got to tell you, after I've had so many people, if anybody's come up to me after Mass and asked me why I was wearing a veil, or just to comment on the veil, it's usually an older person saying, "Oh, I remember when we had to wear veils. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to see you wear it." Okay, so good. Or somebody will say, "I'm curious, why are you wearing the veil?" So now, at first I wouldn't have a very good explanation, but now I can fall back on my personal favorite reason, which is that sacred vessel one, right? All the sacred vessels in the Mass and sanctuary are covered. I'm a sacred vessel going into God's house. I also cover. Okay. So speaking of natural, let's move into breastfeeding, because that's like the most natural thing in the world, but it's one of the most difficult things. You would think if if this is like the one way that you're going to sustain your child after birth, especially for how many thousands and thousands of years before like formula came along and bottle feeding, you think that this would be really natural and easy, but it is not. Typically, the people who they just get into a groove immediately, that's amazing. I had pined for that experience. Now looking back, it was super, super hard, and I had a really hard time with it. Very difficult, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, mostly unnecessary because of my own stubbornness, but whatever. I go par for the course for my life, right? But now looking back, I'm glad I suffered, because it helped me troubleshoot a lot, and it helped me do a lot of research. And I've been so happy to talk to other women, either new mothers or soon to be breastfeeding moms, and just to talk to them about my experiences. If this had been an easy road, I would not have had this advice to share. So I'm happy now that I can look back, and the troubles are in the past. Thank God, literally, and be able to share some stuff with you. And I actually have two blog posts, a part 1 and part 2, about breastfeeding. So I will link those in the show notes as well. The main thing I want to talk about breastfeeding is that what made a huge difference for me is I had the mindset that this wasn't something I was just going to try. It was something I was going to do. Because I knew that how difficult it requires really is just this total self-giving. Anytime another human is hungry, you're a little human, you have to do it. Even if it's the middle of the night, even if you're really tired, even if you want to cook dinner, even if you want to relax, it's you. Right. And that's a beautiful thing. And again, that's one of those things, the sacred vessel thing, right? A man can't do this, and they can't breastfeed, but we can. Wow. So beautiful. But knowing that it's difficult, right? And I wound up with children who, no matter what bottle I would try to use, and I spent a small fortune on bottles, nobody would use a bottle. So that means that I either had to, they would just wait to eat, which was really stressful, and they'd be really grumpy and hungry when I saw them, or a babysitter would have to try to spoon feed them. Later on, I wound up getting a yogurt maker and making breast milk yogurt, which I didn't really like to do because that heated up the breast milk and killed off some of the nutrients, but my baby's fed. Isn't that better? I think so. I think that was like the biggest. I had read that piece of advice in a breastfeeding book that a friend of mine had given me at my baby shower. And it was probably the best piece of advice I had. So if you are thinking about breastfeeding, or if you are struggling with it now, or maybe in the future, you may get pregnant and breastfeed, wherever you're at, I think that mindset of it's not something that you try to do, it is something that you do. Now, of course, there may be issues where you don't have, you have low supply, or there's an illness and you can't breastfeed, or something else like that. That's different, right? Those are special, specific issues. But in general, if you just we'll see how it goes. I gotta tell you, as a new mom, you've never breastfed and your baby's never breastfed. So you're both learning together. And that's a tricky thing. The learning curve is steep. It's really, really steep. So I would suggest you just go all in and do what you can to avoid this wishy-washy, just shrugging. We'll just see how it goes, be firm about it and have faith that you and your baby can work it through. Now, I got to tell you, my son, my firstborn, I thought that I had a good latch. And then the lactation consultant came in and told me something else. And I started having a lot of pain, but I was a first-time mom and totally unprepared for any of this stuff. I got to tell you, I don't know how I got through that pregnancy because I was just so just hands up. It was an unplanned pregnancy and I didn't know what was going on. And I just did not take ownership like I should have. Now I know better. But where was I? Oh yeah. So, I think her well-meant advice, I am grateful that she was willing to help, but she didn't help. And I think she made things worse. And then of course I didn't know what I was doing. So I just followed along. So I just let this, and I also have a high pain tolerance. So I wound up, just letting my son, who, had a mild tongue tie, just really wreak havoc on my poor body. And even, it was bad. It was really, really, really bad. Even my OBGYN, when I went in, because I think I wound up with mastitis or something, said that I just looked nastified. That was his word when he looked at my body. Great, right? But I just really, it's a good thing, right? It wasn't just something I tried. It was something I was committed to doing. Plus, again, unplanned pregnancy in my 20s. My husband is 4 years younger than me. So it was not like we were financially secure. We couldn't even afford formula. It was breastfeeding or bust for us. So it was just something that I had to do. Now, looking back now, God did decree that a woman suffers during birth. We suffer throughout even past birth. So I think it's a continuing, even with the difficulties of breastfeeding, whether it is the difficulty that you have to drop everything to breastfeed your baby. And that can be really difficult. And especially when we have these selfish tendencies where we just want to take care of ourselves, and we're feeling touched out and we're exhausted. It's this constant reminder that we are, we die to self all the time. Every day, mothers die to self, or wives die to self. But we are always called to this self-death in motherhood. And I think breastfeeding is just a really, really, maybe one of the strongest reminders of that. Now, I could have certainly taken ownership and tried harder to learn about what was going on and call another lactation consultant, which I think I may have. I think I had another lactation consultant come in a few weeks after I got that bad advice. And there was just bleeding and chapped everything. And it was so awful. Eventually, I wound up getting nipple shields. That was the only thing that I wore that finally gave everything enough time to heal. And my son was getting better at breastfeeding. But one of the things that I really would suggest is try every single nursing position. There's all different. There's the clutch position and the cross body. And I don't know, there's 5 or 6 different, laying down the side, having the baby lay on top of your stomach. There's so many different ones. And besides that nipple shield that I wore in my bra, that gave my, just that air circulation, that things could heal and not be moist all the time. I don't know. I know it's a horrible word. I'm sure a lot of women just cringed when I said that. That was really helpful. And finally, I took the advice that I had read weeks prior that said, try all of the different nursing positions. You never know which one will be more comfortable. And at the time I was like, I'll just stick with the typical one that you see. I'm not going to try anything, fancy. But I finally switched to the football hold or the clutch hold, where you hold the baby on the side of your body. And that, my son was able to latch really well there, and it didn't cause any pain. Finally I started healing, but it was a good, probably the first 3 or 4 months were, really like a living hell. I cried a lot during breastfeeding. It felt like pieces of glass just scraping me. It was just so awful. And I think if it wasn't for my commitment to the fact that we are doing this, and my son was being fed, he was plumping up, he was healthy. So it wasn't like I was unable to give him enough milk. I had an oversupply. So I was able to, I could see him flourishing, and I wanted so desperately to have that beautiful connection. Excuse me. And I'm very glad that I stuck it out and kept that advice. So I would suggest to anyone who was thinking about nursing or is having difficulty nursing, don't give up. Be creative. This is something you do, not something you try. It is difficult and it requires a death to self. And we should expect that as fallen humans, that God calls us, especially women. I mean, right in Genesis, he says we're going to have pain in childbirth. That pain continues on throughout motherhood. So it's death to self, and it's a beautiful thing. Now, that said, unnecessary pain and struggling does not need to happen. Find out a good lactation consultant. If you don't like what one says, find another one. Try different nursing positions. There are options, right? And also, if you do wind up feeding your baby formula or getting donated breast milk because you don't have your supply isn't big enough to support your baby, you did not fail either. It is not all or nothing. It's not one way or all another. I know a friend of mine felt so guilty because her milk didn't come in for the first few weeks. It was a while after birth before her milk came in, and she had to give her baby formula, and she felt like she failed, and she didn't. You're feeding your baby. You gave that baby life. As long as that baby is fed and growing and healthy, to the best that the best of your abilities, you're not failing. So I'm saying this as I've breastfed every baby. I'm currently feeding baby number 4, and we've been doing this now for 7 months. The longest I ever breastfed a baby was, I think maybe 18 months in a shop, but my milk dries up halfway through the next pregnancy, which is why all the babies just wean around the same time, because I wound up getting pregnant again. So okay. So if you're breastfeeding, I hope that helps too. I will also link the part 1 and part 2 blog posts that I did a little while ago. Okay. Sorry, I was just taking a sip here. All right. Where should we go next? Well, how about let's talk discipline, because that was another one I wanted to talk about. I hope you're following along okay with this little hodgepodge episode. Okay. Discipline. I think that, discipline has gotten a bad rap. I always struggle with seeing, memes or parents complain about their kids and they'll call their kids mean names. And just really just mean about their kids, that they're just pains in the butts, or why can't they just let mom relax and all this stuff. And I gotta say, I think a lot of it boils down to how we are disciplining our children. Discipline is constant. I remember my mom years ago saying that if anybody tells you that raising kids isn't that hard, you can just let them go and do it off on their own, I think they're wrong. Not that you have to helicopter. Definitely don't do that. You need to give them space and room to grow healthily. But I think that you really have to tend that garden, right? Just as you would you take out the weeds. Well, that's the same with bad behavior or undesirable behavior. I think a great rule stick, is that if there's something that really bothers you that your kids do, nip that in the bud, right? I think that just, not that you don't mess with everything. You don't try to do everything and correct everything. But if it's hurting themselves or somebody else, or it's something that you really can't stand, then it's gone. So discipline, I think, let's remember that it's our duty to be stewards of our children and to guide them in right behavior. And that's what really discipline is. So our goal is to get ourselves, remember, and our spouse and our children to heaven. And as the grown-ups, moms and dads, we're in charge of the spiritual and physical and mental health of our children, who are fallen humans. And so we have to offer regular instruction, because they don't know. You'll hear people say, "Oh, children are pure." I remember growing up, my mom didn't like the whole idea of sin, and how could a child sin? You're just children. But I mean, I see my kids do bad stuff all the time. They're sweet, but they're still fallen, sinful people. So they need instruction, because otherwise, how are they going to know? And I think by offering this regular instruction to our children, my husband and I both we enjoy being parents, right? It isn't just this constant rolling of our eyes or screaming match or shouting from the other room for somebody to knock it off and to stop whining or stop teasing your brother or whatever it is. It is hands-on. It is in close proximity to our children. It takes a lot of effort and grooming. It is not helicoptering. It's letting certain behaviors just go as part of their personalities and not trying to change it all. But we have like a zero tolerance policy for sibling fighting. We have a zero tolerance policy for a bad attitude. We have zero tolerance for any dangerous behavior, right? Like running out into the street or whatever other, touching the stove. And I think being consistent and clear along the way has made a huge difference in our own attitudes in approaching our children and how well our children behave. Not to say they're angels, they're not. They do all this stuff all the time. I mean, it's a constant correction, but it is done lovingly and with the idea of we are raising adults who will hopefully prayerfully get to heaven. So when you I think it's better, don't focus on the punishment, but discipline. So discipline is, instead of punishment, which is kind of a one-off consequence to a bad behavior, discipline is an ongoing process of instruction. And so it needs to be about setting expectations and following through with reasonable consequences, and always following through and always having reasonable consequences, and being that good shepherd, right? Now, that doesn't mean that punishment doesn't have a place beneath that umbrella of discipline, but it's mostly discipline, which is just as, we would have to discipline ourselves into right behavior about exercising or getting our prayers in every day or getting up early in the morning to spend time with spiritual reading or something. That's discipline. That takes work and right instruction. And it's the same thing for our kids. So, I'm learning Latin right now. I think I've mentioned this a couple of times. I picked up the Duolingo app, which is free on my phone. I don't pay for the plus version. I don't even know how much that costs. I suffer through the ads. I've been doing Latin now for about 3 months. It's not ecclesiastical Latin, so it's different than what you would get if you went to a traditional Latin mass, but it's still super helpful. And it's helped me with the pronunciation for the prayers for the rosary, which is mainly where I was looking to learn Latin, the reason I was looking to learn Latin. But anyway, so one of the word for student is discipulos, and that means one who learns. So this is where our word for discipline comes from. And it's like I said, a learning of right behavior, one who learns. It's learning right behavior. And then, but I think that punishment is instead it's to cause suffering in hopes of affecting a future behavior. So sometimes punishment has to happen. It has to fall under that umbrella of discipline, like I said. But again, think of right behavior. And you really have to nip bad behavior or wrong behavior in the bud. And you have to be really active in doing that. Otherwise, what I've learned, just like in my yard, I didn't think about this past 2 weeks. I saw a couple of dandelions in the yard and I let them go. And they got their little white wispy puffs and the wind blew. And I woke up the other morning and almost the entire yard, and we had a lot of rain, almost the entire yard was now covered in dandelions. I ruined my lawn because I didn't just pluck those weeds out when I should have those couple of weeds. I'm in the process of digging all these weeds out by hand, and it's awful. But the same thing with bad, wrong behavior in a child. You just nip it in the bud at the beginning. And again, the standard that we go for is anything that's dangerous to themselves or to others, whether that's physical or emotional or mental danger, spiritual danger, there's a lot of things that can fall under that, or things that we just can't stand. I cannot stand whining. So if I hear anybody whining, I'm sorry, I can't understand you. We just kind of nip that in the bud. So I think when it comes to, ideas of how to develop this, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing I should mention this. it's important, I think, to develop a style of discipline. Think it through. It needs to be intentional, just like you would come up with a workout plan for how you're going to get from where you are now to your goal in 3 months. You'd have a plan for that. Have a plan for your discipline. And it'll change over time. As you get in and actually start to do things, you may think you'll see things that work and things that don't, and you'll like certain things and you won't like certain things. But especially you and your husband or you and your spouse need to be on the same page when it comes to this stuff. So you talk about it. Talk about what works, what do you like, what you don't like, and create a plan. So even with your kids, you want to set expectations early and often. So set expectations for yourself of what you're planning to do for your discipline for your children. And then explain it to your kids. We don't whine in our house, right? This is something that your father and I do not allow. No whining, right? And then you talk things through. Explain why the rules exist as they do, why they need to be followed. Kids are smart, right? Even if they're toddlers and they're not going to quite get it, it's good for everybody just to get in the habit of hearing that kind of language and for you to say that kind of language. And then rather than lecture, because children don't have the attention span, use the consequence as the teacher. Oh, okay, you're going to hit your brother. Well, if you can't be kind to your brother, you can't play with him. I can't have you, hurting your brother. So you have to sit over here by yourself for a while. And that also, it comes into another point of using timeouts as a way to calm a child down, rather than using it to punish them by forcing them to be alone. And then you always have to make sure that you follow through. Actually, let me come back to that point for a second, because timeouts are fine. Timeouts are, and even if you need to be there with your child while they calm down, it's not this like ostracized time, at least, and we don't do it in our house like this. All we say is, why don't you go sit on the couch or sit up in your room until you take some deep breaths. And when you feel calm and ready, you can come down now. So we actually have never done, 5 minutes in the corner. That's it. 5 minutes or 3. I've heard that you put a child in a timeout for 1 minute for how many years they are. So if they're 3 years old, you put them in timeout for 3 minutes. I tend not to do that. And it's worked well with all of our kids. I just say, I need you to go spend some time in your room alone. Or if they're really in a hard way, I'll go up with them. But I always say, when you're ready to come down, you can. When you're ready to, take a deep breath and you've calmed yourself, you can come on down. And that varies per child. Some of my children will stay up in their rooms and will read and have some quiet time for 30 minutes. They don't need to. They could have come down, after a couple minutes. And then I have another child who just needs to go upstairs or go into her room or go into another room, take a few deep breaths, and she's back in like 1 or 2 minutes later. And I don't force arbitrary boundaries just for the heck of it. And forcing myself onto the kids in that way. I let them, the discipline again is there for right behavior. So if they are ready to participate in right behavior, they can come down. That's fine. And then also, you got to stay calm. This is like the hardest thing. I tend to be a naturally impatient person. So my patience wears thin, and it's so difficult not to yell sometimes, especially as kids grow and their ability to reason. It can get even more frustrating when they break a rule. You're like, what are you doing? You know better, right? But really try not to belittle. Don't be petty. You're the adult, and you're the one that's trying to guide them in right behavior, to discipline them in being a human who behaves correctly. So don't name call. I think that's pretty obvious. But of course, we are fallen, sinful humans anyway as well. So don't say you're an idiot. Bite back those words. That way you don't have to take it to confession either. Rather say you're a smart kid, but that was not a wise thing to do, right? If you, and then explain, talk it through, and always follow through. Never just say, hey, I told you to knock it off. And find a few minutes later, I told you to knock it off again, or else, the kids know better. You just think back to your childhood. You probably know all this stuff. It's also a waste of time, I think, to ask a kid why they misbehaved. They have no idea. They just did it because they did it. Move on. Don't try to get to the whys. I don't think that that really gets anywhere. And then also, once emotions have cooled down, and even later on in the day, debrief a little bit. My children have their nightly prayers where they say, Dear Jesus, today my day was a good day. Thank you for ... I'm sorry for ... Help me too. Right. So especially in those last two, I'm sorry for and help me too. And you can talk about things then, with your children, especially the younger ones. I'm sorry that I yelled at my mom or whatever. I had a bad attitude towards my mother. Help me to, be kinder to my mother or whatever it is. And then talk about it a little bit. And when emotions are cool and people feel like they are going to talk without the defenses being up. And also expect to have to do it all again tomorrow, right? Discipline is over and over and over again. We've practiced it daily as adults in various formats. Children need it too. Also, as the parents, pray and go to confession and get the Eucharist as much as you possibly can. That will help you, guide you, and go to adoration. Say your prayers yourself. Do your examination of conscience every night. Do a memorare. Every morning I do a memorare asking the Blessed Mother for help, and being patient like her, and being loving like her, and being obedient to God's will like her. And I got to tell you, the days that I have not said that prayer, hugely different than the ones that I have. And it usually comes down to me having more patience and just feeling more capable as a mother. And a shepherd, a good shepherd for my children on the days that I do. And finally, make sure that the time you spend with your children, when you're speaking directly with them or if you're around them, it is mostly in the positive, right? Modeling good positive behavior. Don't ever mock a spouse or backtalk. Patiently explain things, have fun, play games, pray together, actively and happily do chores around the home. Anything that you feel like you would struggle with your child doing, don't do it yourself, right? If you want your child to speak kindly and respectfully to you and your husband, then you speak kindly and respectfully to your child and to your husband, model that behavior back to them. And that goes a very long way because kids observe everything. All right. Finally, I did want to talk about one last topic, and I think I think they're well-meaning posts. Hold on, I'm going to take a quick sip. I think they're well-meaning posts on Instagram, especially, but it's these posts that say things like, ladies, get yourself a husband who, and then there's a litany of all these tasks that a husband should perform, whether that is, working without complaining, changing diapers, getting up in the middle of the night with the baby, bringing home flowers, folding laundry, putting the laundry away, doing the dishes. I mean, like all these amazing things. But every time I see posts like that, and again, I think they're really well-meaning. I think it boils down to the person writing the post thinking, ladies, have somebody that respects you, right? Make sure that this person that you are going to marry is treating you well. That's a great thing to encourage, right? You don't want to encourage somebody to marry somebody who's going to be a jerk to you, right? But I think can you imagine if we flip that around? Hey, gentlemen, get yourself a lady who will cook you dinner every night without complaining and always do the dishes and get up in the middle of the night with her baby so that you can sleep. Can you imagine the fury that you would get, the backlash from something like that? I think it just sets these standards that are too high. And if you're already married and you see these posts and you don't have a spouse who does all those things that this person is on social media is telling you that he should be doing, I wonder how that makes you feel, right? My husband does not do a lot of those things on the litany of desirable traits for a man, but we have a wonderful marriage, and I'm so happy that he is the way he is, and we have grown together. And where he may have been a little more selfish when he was 22 years old or whatever, he has grown since becoming a Catholic and being married to me and having 4 kids. And we've grown together. If I waited until I found somebody who's as perfect as this, as what these posts are trying to tell me, I would never have found my husband, or I don't know if I would have found anybody. I would just be totally disappointed. So I think my advice is, if you see these posts, say, ladies, find yourself a man who ... You fill that in by, find yourself a man who chased Christ. Ladies, chase Christ. Run to Christ and see. And if you were looking for somebody to have a relationship with, look who's running with you. I think a friend of mine had said that their priest had told them that in confession. If you are struggling to find a good person to be with, just run to Christ and look around to see who is running with you. And I think you'll have better luck that way than trying to check off a bunch of traits and do-goods on a list that you may not be able to ever check off, especially not at first. So, and I think that the running to Christ thing covers a lot of requirements like charity and respect and faith. There's right orientation towards the most important things in life, God. So I think that can go a much farther way than just this list of, which are good. Those are physical, or manifestations of those traits that I'm talking about, but they're going to be different for everybody. My husband always shares candy with me, even if it's his favorite candy and it's the last piece. If I look a little interested in it, he'll give it to me. It's very selfless of him, I think, in small ways. Or he'll lock the front door. He always checks for the doors are locked, and he always wants me to check in and make sure I got someplace safe or whatever. I mean, there's small things that he does that don't usually make it on the list that I see on social media on these posts. So, and if you have a husband who does not meet the criteria of those social media posts, do not despair. But if you do you're finding yourself in a relationship where the husband or your wife, if you're a man listening, is not running to Christ as you are, don't despair. God works with impossible cases, and he does amazing things. So I don't think you'd have to worry too much. Keep running to Christ, and keep your faith life and your goal of getting yourself to heaven and your children to heaven and your husband or your wife to heaven. Keep that at the forefront, and you pray novenas to Saint Monica along the way. If you're trying to say convert your spouse or your child or something, but focus on that stuff. That's the important stuff. And I think that you can maybe not pay so much attention to those inaccurate, well-meaning but inaccurate posts about all the traits that you need to find in a man before he's worthy of you. Because really it comes down to not finding the right person, but you yourself being the right person. And you can become that person by pursuing your faith life. Okay. I hope that's a very helpful advice that I've given across a broad subject range. If you have any questions, of course, I love getting them. Email me, Christine@thecatholicmama.com. Find me on Instagram @thecatholicmama. Go to thecatholicmama.com. There's a contact form there. I love all the questions. I love them, love them, love them. And also, don't forget to get on the email list. I am actually announcing a giveaway today for some really cool books for people who are on my email list. So if you want to get the free ebook on how to talk to your kids about God, go to thecatholicmama.com and get that form there. You'll get on the email list, and then you will get notifications about cool things like giveaways, and also keep up to date on things that are happening around the Catholic Mama. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. And again, any questions, let me know. And until next time, I'll be praying for you. Take care.
Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy to understand grown-up answers, the pared down but not talked down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.